All right. I hope you can all see my screen. Good. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our research and winemaking webinar series. So as you probably already know, that's a series that started last year, and we decided to keep providing you some information and some of those new topics this year on more specific topics. And so thanks for being with us today, and we hope that you will enjoy the webinar of today on Bentonite, and that will help you to develop some knowledge and skills to be used in your vineyard and winery. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Aude Watrelot. I'm an assistant professor and extension enology specialist in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition at Iowa State University. And I'm co-hosting this webinar with Drew Horton, who is a research specialist of enology at the University of Minnesota's Grape Breeding and Enology Project. So before we start the webinar, just some instruction that you will have to follow. So as I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded and we will provide the recording on YouTube, but please join us, keep joining us for the webinar, because if we just do a webinar for two, it doesn't really make sense. And so those previous recordings will be available on YouTube, and I will put the link on the chat box during that session. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use either the Q&A box or the chat box to type your question. And so you should be able to see 3 dots at the bottom of your screen. So please click on the 3 dots to type your question, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. Also, at the end, you're going to have a link for a survey, or you will receive an email for a survey. That just to make sure we know how we did and what we could change or what we would need to change for the future webinars. So without, I would say, further ado, that's our great pleasure to have Dr. Christian Butzke from Purdue University. And so we don't really have Dr. Pamela Nicolle from St. Anne University today, but she will be presenting through a recording. So who will present about the practical and the theoretical aspect or research approach about bentonite in winemaking to provide you all the information you may need for your winery. So thanks very much, Christian, for being with us today. And Drew, I will give you the time to introduce Dr. Butzke.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. All right. Dr. Butzke is a professor of enology in the Purdue University College of Agriculture's Department of Food Science and the university's first Innovation and Entrepreneurship Fellow. He's a past president of the American Society for Enology and Viticulture, the Winemakers Professional Guild, and was a chief judge at the Indy International Competition, which is the largest scientifically organized and independent wine competition in the U.S. He is the author of 2 books and dozens of scientific and popular publications on wine. His applied research program addresses fine wine quality from fermentation problems to bottle closure issues, from global wine transport conditions to wine aging kinetics. His work on wine has been featured in the popular media, including the New York Times, Boston Globe, PBS, The Economist, Financial Times, Wine Spectator, Rolling Stone magazine, and many others. His responsibilities include planning, coordination, and teaching of a wide variety of professional educational programs in enology, such as the online Purdue Winemaking Certificate, which he will tell us a little about. He also coordinates the College of Agriculture's strategic planning for research, innovation, and commercialization. A former faculty member of the UC Davis Department of Viticulture and Enology, he is the co-founder of the joint Burgundy, California, Oregon Winemaking Symposia, served as the managing committee for the wine industry's largest conference, the United Wine and Grape Symposium, and has also been an award-winning commercial winemaker. He is co-founder and chief enologist of the Purdue-based startup Vinsense, a software company that provides vineyard management decision support through real-time high-resolution functional soil maps, modeling of soil and climate effects on fruit composition and quality, and powerful big data analytics and visualization tools. We're glad to have you today, Dr. Butzke. You may go ahead and start.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Ode. Appreciate the much too lengthy introduction. I think you used up most of the time, so we're almost at the end. No, I'm glad to be, even if it's virtually, back in Iowa. In fact, I was in Minneapolis as well. At a conference the other year, just before the pandemic started. I know you all know how to reach me. I see some names that I'm quite familiar with on the list of participants here. People I have traveled to faraway places with and have visited at their winery. So glad to be back. I'm going to make a few comments, and I'll share my slides in a second with you over the next 30 or so minutes. Those who know me know that I like to stir the pot a little bit, and so I'll touch on a whole bunch of different things very quickly, very rapidly. Some food for thought on, in this case, the use of bentonite in winemaking, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion at the end. I have a few more notes here on things to touch on. So why don't we start? I'll share my screen with you here in a second. There we go. See how this all goes. All right, good. Everybody can hear me, I hope. Let me just move the little window out of the way. All right, so a critical review of bentonite use. When we talk about using a material that is permitted in the production of commercial wine, we always assume that this is something that people have used for a long time, and it's just all supernatural, and because it's legal, it's something that's totally appropriate to do. And I would argue that's not necessarily the case. Let me see. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to hopefully by the end of the seminar allow you to answer those questions that I'm listing here. I'm running this a little bit like I'm running my my student classes. So think for yourself, answer those questions for yourself. Who taught you to use kitty litter treating your wine? Think back of where you learned that, what professor taught you, or what book you read about it. And then we can maybe discuss where some of our practices are truly coming from, and if they're timely still today. What seed stability? Why are we using bentonite, and what are we protecting the wine against? And so some of the practices that we're using and some of the methods that we're using to test the wine for stability relate to things that the wines should never see, and heat is one of those things. How much should I use? We're going to talk briefly about the actual application of bentonite. I know obviously most of you are professional winemakers, so you know what you're doing, but not everybody maybe is, and bentonite is one of those tricky things to dose and weigh out and mix up and mix in. That it's certainly worth talking again briefly about the basics. So we'll do that. And then we'll talk about what bentonite is doing actually to your wine. Obviously, we're using it for a relatively specific purpose, although that purpose is not as specific as you might think. But bentonite can do many other things to your wine, and most of those are not particularly good, which then raises the question, is there an alternative to the use of bentonite? This has been used for quite a long time, for a few generations of winemakers now, and over the years there have been discussion about the alternatives to the use of bentonite in winemaking, yet almost every winemaker still uses it to this very day. And I was just discussing the millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars that are going towards wine research on the West Coast right now. I think it would be helpful if actually some of that money would address some commercial practices rather than exploring some things that are really rather irrelevant. But again, I will make some political comments as we go along the way. And here's the slide I like to show in some of my classes when it comes to different finding methods, different wine-making practices. And I don't want to offend anybody or I want to offend people who have been making wine successfully for a long time, but it's always worth rethinking what we're actually doing, questioning the status quo in commercial winemaking, because in the end, we want to save resources, we want to save money, we want to create less waste, waste less energy, and make a better tasting product. And sometimes those traditions that we're using don't really contribute to that at all. I was at the Australian Wine Research Institute a couple of years ago before the pandemic hit, and attended the technical conference there, and talked to Simon Nordegard at the AWRI. He shared a beautiful poster that he actually presented there on a number of winemaking practices, and this one here, I'm not going to go into detail, but I've attached it to the end of my slides here if you want to look at it. It deals a little bit with the history of the use of clays in winemaking, the differences in sizes, in sodium versus calcium, bentonite, actually kaolin being used first before bentonite was used, and some of the alternatives that we'll discuss here as well. So that's a nice, really beautiful summary, in fact, to if you're not familiar with bentonite or where it came from, how it developed. So you can look at that after my talk. But I'll touch on a few of those issues discussed here. So here's a list of things that I just came up with after Drew and Odd asked me to talk about bentonite. This is not my area of expertise, but then again, I'm a generalist. I know a little bit of everything in the world of wine, as you can tell from my resume. So the issues that we often discuss are the questions of why we test for heat stability, why we treat a wine against exposure to heat that it should never see. And so those heat unstable proteins that the bentonite finding is used again is a great example of overstabilization of wine. Again, if that would be done just to take those proteins out of the wine, that's one thing. But whenever you treat a wine, you also take other desirable things out of it. And obviously that's not a good thing. But as we, particularly during the pandemic, have seen a large increase in direct-to-consumer shipping. We'll talk about that a little bit more because that's where the wine gets abused. That's where the wine sees sometimes the conditions that we're actually stabilizing against. And bentonite, of course, is a very radical type of stabilization of fining. It takes all the protein out and not just the unstable protein. Obviously, in this situation, we want to protect the aesthetics of wine. We don't want to have any unappetizing cloudy deposit in the bottle. So all of this is really not about how the wine tastes or smells. It's about how the wine looks and again, stabilizing it and taking everything out that is heat unstable doesn't really reflect the need for taking proteins out that become unstable over a longer period of time, not necessarily related to heat exposure at all. But then again, we do see some heat exposure, and I'll show you some information about what wines actually experience being shipped from your winery to the consumer, or what happens if you order wine like I do. That leads me to, again, question the long list that we have about materials that are permitted in commercial wine making. That list is made by you. That's a list of procedures that wineries, winemakers asked to be able to use. So if that list gets longer and longer, that's your own fault. You have to realize that the Tax and Trade Bureau does not really have any people with expertise in winemaking. And that's another issue. I would hope that the regulatory agency has a bunch of people that are highly qualified to judge those procedures, but they don't seem to have those. So that's again a political issue that I don't want to get into. But again, it's good to talk about it and realize it. Already mentioned heat stable versus time stable protein. We often use tests to determine the dose of bentonite in wine, and those are typically heat tests that are most widely used. And again, they're testing for something that the wine should actually never experience, temperatures the wine should never see. So those tests are not really preventing proteins from precipitating that are not sensitive to heat, but are rather precipitating over time. But again, bentonite takes it all out. So in that case, it works. It will make the wine stable, but it again might take things out there that would contribute to mouthfeel, that contribute to the varietal aroma of your wine. And that's obviously a bad thing. The dosage is extremely wide-ranged, very different from most other fining agents. So it basically goes from 0 to, I have used 15 pounds per 1,000 in a very heat unstable bottling of, God, what was it? I can think of it. A hybrid variety that I use. So again, different varieties have a different number of proteins in them, and I've always argued that some of that might be related actually to cold hardiness. My old colleague Bruce Bordelon always argued against it, but again, you sometimes wonder why the hybrids or the Minnesota varieties, for example, that are more cold hardy have a lot more protein than others. And the same is true for vinifera with Riesling, for example, or Gewürztraminer. When you deal with talk to suppliers, they will often obviously point out the properties of their product. There are sodium, calcium bentonites out there. Some need a lower dose, but create possibly a larger lees volume because they just swell more. So again, it's typically a trade-off, and it doesn't really matter too much what type of bentonite you would use. I could argue either use less and have a bigger volume of lees, or you lose more and have more compaction. Again, we in general want to try to avoid the introduction of more sodium into the human diet. That's why we using potassium metabisulfite, not sodium metabisulfite, like the home winemakers sometimes do. So again, that's also something to discuss with your supplier, what the formulations contribute in regard to the mineral content that they're based on. One thing I'll briefly discuss is, of course, that we're also creating solid waste when we treat bentonite, just like the kitty litter you have to get rid of. When you have cats, you have to get rid of your lees, and that's can be a problem. Not only getting rid of it, but if you dump it into your sewer system, it can plug up pipes, your septic system, particularly if you do cold sterilization at the same time, or if you still have yeast lees. It's a very thick material that is really hard to remove or move out of pipes. So again, be careful when you dump it. If you have a chance, if it gets into your wastewater pond, it might not be too bad, but eventually it accumulates. And so the solid waste issue is something. The applications of bentonite as they are today in the industry they're not recyclable forms, although that is possible, but it's typically not done. And so it again goes to solid waste, just like DE and some of the other filter pads and all those things that we're using in winemaking. Briefly touching here on it, when I first started in the industry like 30 years ago, there was a time when it became popular to do some juice fining, juice treatments with bentonite to take some of the proteins out kind of ahead of time, most of them. But those kind of juice treatments can also take amino acids out that are needed for yeast nutrition, and that may then cause fermentation problems. So that's not done anymore, I believe. But again, sometimes ideas make their way back because people have forgotten about the application. And of course, that's one thing we tried a few years ago now when the issue came out from that Anna Catherine Mansfield raised out of Cornell, that some of the red hybrid varieties are rich in color. The wines typically are low in tannins, but the fact actually was that there is relatively abundance of tannins actually, just that they don't end up in the wine. It's a little bit like the color in Pinot Noir, only a very small fraction of Pinot Noir color pigments end actually up in the finished wine. So the same is true with hybrids and their tannins, and the idea about self-fining, that the hybrid proteins actually are taking out their own tannins, that became a point of a discussion, and I think it still is. We did some experiments at that time to use actually a bentonite must treatment to take some of the proteins out so that they don't precipitate the tannins. The results weren't particularly convincing, and so again, from the perspective of also other components being absorbed, that's probably not a good idea. Probably more successful are heat treatments, must treatments, and probably a bunch of you are already using some short time high temperature treatments for your hybrid musts to make some better wine, rounder wines, but also a little bit more tannic wines, and that might be again a result, the heat treatment taking care of some of those hybrid proteins. Varietal aromas as well as manoproteins, all those things are bound up by bentonite, so the more you add, the more it will take those characters out, and you're stripping the wine from mouthfeel and varietal aroma, and that's obviously not a good thing. At the same time, if you store your bentonite improperly, just like if you do that with your oak chips or your filter pads, they absorb volatile phenols, be that TCA in the winery, or be those other smells, maybe smoke taint if you operate in an area that has fires around, or whatever's in the air. Bentonite absorbs it nicely and will release it into your wine when you treat it later. So storing it properly is another big issue. So again, I already criticized the long list of juice and wine treating materials that we're allowed to use, and again, questioning those practices every now and then I think is a good idea. I came across a bottle of wine, I guess that came from a celebrity that created her own wine label, and they put an ingredient list on there, as you see now on some wines, and I thought it was kind of funny. Organic grapes, sulfites, cream of tartar, and bentonite clay. Those are the 4 ingredients to make I guess organic wine. But again, listing it as an ingredient is probably not necessary. The bentonite will leave the wine again after it is settled, and even if you use it, it will not stay in the wine. So I'm not sure why they did this, but it's kind of funny to see. So what it comes down to is really the winemaking ethics. Just because you have the right to do those things to your wine doesn't mean you necessarily should, and that's again why questioning your practices every now and then is a good idea. If you have a recipe for your wines that works well for you, I'm not going to argue with this, but again, it's also time to look at some alternatives and maybe some ways to reduce solid waste and keep stripping our wines on a regular basis. Very funny video, the Litter Critter video from Saturday Night Live here, if you want to Google that. But you can also find my Purdue Extension publication on finding with bentonite, a nice summary. I've attached it to the slides here too, but you can certainly look at that. That again summarizes some of the points I'm making here today. I also suggest that you mix up just concurrently on a particular wine all the different finding agents you have in your winery, just to see what they're actually doing to their wine at different doses, or in this case here, the same dose. That was a talk I gave up in Michigan a few years ago. Again, the more we add, and of course we're lucky, we're not like here the Sara Lee chocolate cream. We don't normally have to put our ingredients on the label. As I said, just showed you some wineries do now, but luckily we don't, because otherwise the list might just look like that, and that's certainly a big turnoff for consumers. But just experiment a little bit what the different finding agents do to your wine, so you have a better idea how they strip different components out of it. Also, because sometimes when you hand your work order to an intern or cellaret or wherever you have around, whoever mixes things up for you, make sure that everybody kind of has a idea of the doses that you're adding and what the finding materials actually look like quantitatively, so that you have an idea if you add a couple of pounds per thousand, what that should look like, so that if somebody weighs out the wrong numbers or does the wrong calculation, that you immediately have an idea that something went wrong. I think that can always help understand and make those mistakes, because that's certainly something that happens quite regularly. People over or under dosing because they can't do the math properly. Just here, when it comes to, again, all the treatments we can do for wine, I think an intelligent winemaker uses as little of those agents as possible. But on the other hand, you don't just want to do this because out of philosophical reasons. You want to really target different things that are wrong with your wine. And again, a lot of the things that we do, a lot of the products that the suppliers are selling us are based on flaws and problems that shouldn't be there in the first place. So taking care of proper yeast nutrition certainly avoids some of the hydrogen reduced sulfur mercaptan problems. Again, over extraction of wine, of grapes, of skins and seeds happens still quite regularly. So again, all the protein finding agents that we're using, they're certainly also not really particularly natural when it comes to winemaking. And so if you can avoid those things as much as you can and do proper quality control in your lab to test or again, not over extract your wine to start with, that certainly helps. The two main stabilization issues here that we have, cold stability and precipitation of potassium bitartrate, that still continues to be a big waste of energy. Cooling your tank for weeks on end. That should by now again be taken care of. We should have continuous operations to take bitartrate out if it becomes unstable. But again, sometimes it just helps understanding how much more potassium you're adding by putting sorbate in or by putting more bisulfite in before bottling. That can help to avoid cold stability issues. And of course, a lot of it is about consumer education, making people understand that some of those crystals don't affect the quality of the wine, but actually are a sign of natural production practices. We have always failed to really cover that part of consumer education. And to some degree, that's true for age stability too. Those unstable proteins, they can look pretty ugly, I agree, in the bottle. And historically, of course, people have you have a punt in the bottle for a reason. You have dark colored glass for a reason. You have capsules and big labels for a reason to cover up some of those visual flaws. But now that we see more and more clear bottles and we were showing everybody what the wine, how perfectly clear and visually attractive the wine is, and those ways of kind of hiding those natural instabilities have gone away, and maybe it's again time to rethink that. I'm always struck when I look at the amount of online ordering of wine now, how wine is shipped. And it is indeed shipped without exception practically in unrefrigerated trucks like UPS truck or FedEx truck here that sits on the road for 12, 14, 16 hours with your wine in it. That's an example here of a case of wine from wine.com that I ordered earlier this year. You can see the wines haven't quite brought it out yet, but nonetheless, that's how the gentleman from FedEx left the wine in the sun out by the garage, and I caught it right away. But it would have, if I'd been at work, it would have sat there for a bunch of hours in the sun. So again, educating our distributors, educating the shipping companies about how sensitive wine actually is, I think is more important. But again, this wine in this case here is overstabilized to a degree that it doesn't matter. It doesn't show. If that wine was cooked and the quality was ruined, the sensory quality was ruined, it still wouldn't throw any proteins. So that's what we do. We overstabilize the wine for those kind of things, but we don't actually take care of the supply chain. Here's an example of some research I did years ago when I was still at Davis. Again, following some of the national shipments of wine across the country, in this case here from California to Chicago, and you can see what the temperature exposure was and how the wine suffered on this relatively brief trip across the country, and that's happening more and more these days. Again, the winemakers typically put their head in the sand about it. They're happy that their wine is sold to start with. And so again, we're shipping ice cream and milk. I've given this kind of comparison many times before, under much better conditions than we would ship a $3 or $30 or $300 or $3,000 bottle of wine. And I think again that's a problem. You can't stabilize a pint of ice cream or a gallon of milk against heat unstable protein, but we're doing this for a much more expensive product Again, that's called tradition. So Bentonite, just again here for the basics, getting away from the politics of wine making and wine distribution. People ask me, when do you add bentonite, and you can do this, for example, concurrently when you're doing cold stabilization. The reaction happens essentially instantaneously, absorbs the proteins right away. But again, when you mix it up, and you need to mix the bentonite into water, not the other way around. I always used 2 gallons of water per pound of bentonite. So 2 gallons per pound, that gives you a nice, nice kind of slushy consistency. Gives enough water for good swelling. Use hot water, and use clean hot water. If you have if you're on a municipal water system and you have chlorine in there, that can't be used. It has to be clean water, free of chlorine, free of iron and other things. So make sure you have that when you mix those things up. I think Drew, he suggested, get yourself a nice stainless steel mixer on Amazon, and one of those paint mixers, food mixers, that you can buy for a few dollars, and get yourself a nice lithium-ion powerful drill, electric drill, and then you can mix those things up pretty nicely without clumping, and that really helps with the mixing in. I would typically mix it by rolling the tank, putting some nitrogen in from the bottom of a larger tank if you're set up to do this. That way you can climb on top and mix the bentonite in from the top, and it mixes in very evenly and consistently. And again, the reaction is pretty instantly. It's not much temperature dependent. So if you already turned the refrigeration on to cold stabilize, that still works quite well. It will take a little while to settle down in a cooler liquid, but nonetheless, that works. So the contact time, there's not much. It will settle out gradually, and the temperature is not as important. But again, the temperature for mixing it up in the first place, that's important. You want to do it with hot water so it goes quickly. You want to use water. You don't mix up bentonite with wine. That would be a total waste of wine, and it wouldn't cause the bentonite to swell as much. So use nice clean water. And then again, once it sits on the bottom, once it has settled down, sits on the bottom of your tank, make sure you have good ways to get it out, that it doesn't plug up any of your pipes. So that's a little bit tricky. Again, you want to have it well filtered, well settled, sorry, so that doesn't plug up your filters either. So again, those things take a little bit of practice. The same with racking a tank down to the layer of bentonite. So, but that's all stuff that can be easily learned and practiced. Again, the waste treatment, what to do with all that bentonite in the end, just flushing it into your pond or into your septic system, that might go well for a while, but eventually you'll have to get it out of there, and you should know how that's done before you get your pipes under the winery completely plugged and the sewer backing up. Briefly touching again here at the self-fining of tannins in hybrid reds, the work here that Anna Catherine did. So those kind of phenomena that we see in some of the hybrids are a reflection of, I would argue, improper breeding of grapes for wine production. That's an issue I've raised many times before. I think a lot of the grape breeders have produced varieties that grow well in the vineyard, that are pest resistant, that are cold hardy, but winemaking always has come second. That's true with Harold Olmos tries with vinifera, intervinifera crosses in California, and it's still true today. So if you make colorful red wines that taste like white wines, then there's something wrong from the very, very beginning of evaluating those varieties or breeding them or selecting them for commercial release. So that's again a political issue, and as most of the grape breeders are retiring, we're probably not going to see a lot of new varieties without genetic engineering coming on board, but nonetheless, I think it would have been helpful in the beginning. There would have been more input from the winemakers rather than just from the viticulturists. By the way, here's an old quote I think that people often forget about. I talked about over-extraction of tannins earlier as well. So in vinifera, it was known since 1887 that extended maceration on the skins does really nothing to color, but does increase tannins, as you might imagine, from seeds and skins. But still, in many places around the world, people are trying to get more color out by exposing their young wine to more skin contact, and that didn't work in 1887, and it still doesn't work today. Here are a couple of pictures of those trials that we did with bentonite, a must treatment. In this case, that's Stuben here, just to see if we could take some of those proteins out early on to retain more tannins in those wines. The result, just as a small kind of benchtop trial, wasn't very convincing, as I said earlier. So those kind of treatments are difficult on a larger scale to do anyway, mixing bentonite in while the wine is fermenting, but that's really not a practice. I think that's going to be possible. I think it is indeed better to do a must heat treatment to precipitate all the proteins to start with, and that's actually creating some pretty decent wines here with Chambourcin and some other varieties here in Indiana, for example, a good example. So similar, basically, process thermovinification that you would do for the native varieties as well. So, all right. So again, from a winemaking perspective, we're trying to take the proteins out because they take the tannins out in return in the hybrids. So it's not just the aesthetics of protein hazes that are an issue, but then again, because the varieties were poorly bred for winemaking purposes, then we add tannins back. And of course, the suppliers are happy about this, and the list of tannin products that are out there is getting longer and longer. And you can see here fermentation tannins, cellaring tannins, finishing tannins. And just a reflection from the wines that we in the past have seen at the wine competition, there's just a lot of wines that just taste strange. They taste like, somebody added exactly what you see on the slide here, some weird tannin product. I mean, again, I'm not going to argue with you if consumers don't care or buy your wines or like it, but it's certainly strange that we have grow varieties that don't have enough tannins in the wine, and then we add some foreign materials later on. Also mentioned again, keep all your other materials away from any stinky, smelly environments. Again, bentonite can absorb TCA if you use a lot of chlorine in your winery, which you shouldn't to start with, but many winemakers do it nonetheless. TCA is easily absorbed into bentonite, as well as filter pads, oak chips. Lots of opportunity for absorption. So keep it dry. Keep it away from other things, and that way you, if you do use bentonite, at least it doesn't impart any off odors into your wine. By the way, probably another seminar here. Those different volatile phenolics that cause a lot of problems around wine, the cork-tained, the Brettanomyces, and now the smoke-tained out west. Those things are not particularly volatile. As you know, TCA is a solid at room temperature, but they do smell very strongly, and they do get absorbed into wine, into fining materials. And so be careful whatever you have around your environment in the winery, that they don't get in there. So I'm talking quickly and want to go through all those different things, but here's the list we started with again. I'm happy to take some of your questions. I don't have an answer for everything. If you do a heat test to test your protein stability or your heat stability, there are different tests in the different winemaking books. I typically, when I did it, used I think typically one like 120 degrees for 24 hours. That's a lot safer than using some of the methods that use higher temperatures. There's some that say, let's say, 80 degrees Celsius or 180 Fahrenheit for an hour or so. Those are quicker and give you a result faster, but handling 180 degree water is nasty. or having a water bath at that temperature is just not very pleasant to have around. In either case, as I said before, those heat stability tests are testing for something that the wine should never see in the first place, and that's the results you're getting from it. You're testing against something that is not real, and that's why you typically add more bentonite than you should, and you're stripping your wine from it. So there are other options to test for colloidal stability. Roger Bolton's ethanol precipitation test is one of them. You can find those in the Principles and Practices of Winemaking. Again, a little bit harder to set up, a little more tricky, but nonetheless, there are certainly ways to make it happen and use less bentonite on your wine. We're looking forward to the presentation here on the bentonite research. Also, again, when you talk to your suppliers, ask them some hard questions about the topics that I just discussed here. Ask them how much least volume there is created, how much sodium gets into the wine, how much calcium gets into the wine, if there's really a difference. Look at the price too. There's certainly different aspects to that as well. Waste issues, we discussed absorption. We discussed, I think that's pretty much all the different things I had on my mind. I think, again, from a industry perspective, an industry that like to see itself as extremely sustainable and green. I would argue that, again, that those practices of over stabilization, cold stabilization with the huge amount of energy use, heat stabilization with a huge amount of, or not huge amount, but generation of solid waste is not particularly sustainable. As you know, we're using some of the highest amount of pesticides of any agricultural crop. We're using an enormous amount of water on the West Coast to grow grapes. So in order for the industry to really be a green industry, to really be sustainable and not just greenwash its practices, a good discussion about traditional practices, I think, is in order. And I think this seminar here, I appreciate, again, the invitation to touch on some of those things, is a good platform, I think, to make this happen, particularly on a local level. Obviously, we bring a lot of grapes in from, or a lot of juice and wine in from the West Coast. I looked at some of the statistics of how many hybrid red acres there actually are in Iowa and in Minnesota, and as you know, it's pretty small. And the vast majority of the wines that we sell here in Indiana, for example, are West Coast based or based on native varieties that are grown outside of our state. So understanding the implications of the national viticulture practices is I think important wherever you are, if you're in Minnesota or in Indiana or in Iowa. So again, open discussion is important, and I hope this contributed
Christian,
to this.
I don't want to disturb you, but you still have like 2-3 minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done. Just a few things I mentioned here: undesirable features, sediment, waste issues. A lot of the things that we just discussed have been solved for many years. You can read about it in the Principles and Practices from 1996. A lot of the issues have been addressed, but the practices have not changed. And I think that's the problem with people actually reading the scientific papers, reading the wine books, and not just following what your predecessor or your grandfather or grandmother told you about how to make wine. Proteases as bentonite alternatives, another issue that has not been pursued systematically. There are some products out there, but that's something we could still do further, much like we did it here with finding some glucosidases in Thailand some years ago. So doing the same for proteases globally might actually yield some good results. The acid-tolerant proteases that break down protein don't work so well. And again, getting away completely from bentonite, the alternatives are all on the table and have been for a long time now, but the industry has been slow to respond. The research has not been supported, and the suppliers have not jumped on it either. So again, read up on some of those historic articles from 25 years ago, and you understand that we could be in a much better space today if we actually had followed some of those recommendations. Winemaking certificate, if you want to hear me drone on about some of those problems for 4 or 6 weeks, you can take the winemaking certificate. As I said, I have a lot of opinions on different practices, and hopefully you'll take away some of those. Winemaking Problem Solved book with a bunch of co-authors. Again, we're addressing some of those issues in this book that I just talked about. So that's, I think, helpful for practical winemaking and improving your practices. And if you don't get in touch with me, you can always give me a call or email me. I think you know where to find me. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, time goes by fast, but I appreciate your attention and interest. So, and the other information I mentioned is on the back. So, Art is going to put the presentation online, and that's that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Christian.
No
and if you have any question, please use the chat box or the Q&A box. I know that we have already one question, but if you can wait until the end of the webinar, that would be good. So now that's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pamela Nicolle. So she's not with us today, but I'm gonna introduce her and then share the recording that she sent me. And hopefully everybody would be able to hear correctly and see correctly the slides. So Dr. Pamela Nicolle has over 10 years of experience in fermented beverages. Besides her winemaking expertise, she also has had extensive hands-on training in analytical and sensory analysis of grape and wine. She fell in love with wine research after her internship at INRA SPO, Montpellier in France, with Rémi Schneider and Anna Samson on the quality of wine with reduced alcohol content. After graduating with a master in chemical and sensory analysis from Le Havre University in France, she worked as an engineer in INRA Pêche Rouge in France. There she worked on the study of aroma compound production during winemaking fermentation under the supervision of Jean-Roch Mouret and Jean-Marie Sablerol. Sorry, I'm using the French accent. Later, she pursued her career as an engineer at the Station Viticole of BNIC Cognac, France. Her research is focused on the quality of grape and wine and brandy. After successfully finishing her tenure as an engineer, she joined Laval University in Canada for a PhD in food science with Paul Inger and Karine Penot on a full-term and CERC scholarship. In her thesis, she studied the compounds responsible for tannin retention of red interspecific hybrid grape wines cultivated in cold climate. Although challenging, working on hybrid grapes was exciting for her as little was known about it and still is. Since 2019, she has been working as a research associate at St. Anne University, Nova Scotia. There, she helped set up a state-of-the-art analytical platform and also actively participated in designing and setting up a winery. Recently, she was also appointed the supervisor of the wine research facility at St. Anne University. Currently, she is working on a research project which aims into understanding the relationship between growing conditions, berry ripening, berry maturity assessment, and wine quality in interspecific hybrid grapes from Eastern Canada. So let me share the presentation of Dr. Nicolle, and I hope you will all be able to see and hear. Oops. Okay, can you all see the screen? Yes, okay.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Good, thank you. Can you hear?
No, we cannot hear yet.
Okay, let me try again. Sorry for that issue.
It's tricky.
Yeah. It worked yesterday, I swear.
Oh, it did work yesterday. It worked great.
Yeah, yes.
Just do the same.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I will try again. Um, okay, let me leave and come back. Hopefully you will all be here.
All right.
I'll make you the host, Drew.
Okay, that's fine.
Good.
I'm still here and you can hear me.
Thank you.
We're sorry, everybody. We're trying to get this recorded PowerPoint on. Ode and I practiced this yesterday afternoon, and it worked well. Sometimes these things are not so easy.
Do you want me to show a few more slides? I'm happy to. I have thousands.
We might get to that. But let's give Ode a chance to reboot up her WebEx.
I'm back.
We can see you and hear you.
Good. Could you make me presenter, maybe, Drew?
Oh.
Oh, no, I'm good. I'm
Okay.
okay. Yeah. But I think I can still not share the way I wanted to. Let me know if you can hear the presentation.
Oh, I will.
No. Okay. Maybe if anybody has a question, we can start answering those questions now. Do you see the Q&A box or the chat box, Drew?
I do.
Okay.
There's nothing in Q&A. I will look in chat. No, just a minute.
Because
Go ahead.
Seth is asking, so Christian, you mentioned that it's better to use hot water to mix bentonite, but is it true even if the product suggests using cold water?
I suggest you go with whatever product you have and what they're suggesting. I think in our conversation here with Drew, I think you mentioned hot water too. I think it just makes it swell faster, and that way you don't have to wait too long. I still suggest that you wait. You know, Drew, how long do you typically wait if you use hot water? How long do you wait before you put it in the tank?
Oh, a couple hours.
Couple hours, yeah.
I like to give it some time to
Yeah.
swell up. You made a very good point, and everybody should understand this. You add the bentonite to the water, not the other way around. If you do, it'll clump up into a ball of clay and be useless. And you want to add that bentonite very, very slowly while you're stirring that hot or that warm water.
Thank you. We have other questions. Thank you for your question because that's helpful for me.
There's a great question here about, is there a good way to ensure you don't plug up your cross-flow filter with bentonite? I've done this about 12 years ago when I was in California. So the obvious solution, of course, is to do as good a job as you can to rack cleanly off of the bentonite. I just heard last month that Scott Labs, and they may not be the only person, but there is a cross-flow filter friendly form of bentonite. And I'm of course turning to my Scott Labs handbook from this year, and hopefully I can find that very quickly. Go, page 95, 96. Yeah, page 95 of the 2021 Scott Lab book. It's called Blanco Bent or Blanco Bent, UF, and it's a bentonite specifically for use in conjunction with a cross-flow filter. So that's a great question. The next question, this is from Dorothy O'Brien. Hi, Dorothy, and she's at Wide River Winery on the Mississippi River. And she addresses this to you, Christian. It says, Christian, only slightly off topic. Can you give us some details on the heat treatment to bring out tannins in Chambourcin? Is this what we've come to know as?
Again, that's maybe using if you make you might not, but if you make your own Concord juice for fermentation, and you have a heavy heat exchanger to put the wine through, or you have a flash détente system. I have had some winemakers here in Indiana using that kind of heat treatment to get not necessarily the tannins out, but also just make a very pleasant red hybrid wine. So, but again, it will require some equipment to heat it. So if you maybe a winery that does process Concord, I'm not sure if there's much of that done, that might help. Otherwise, if you don't have a heat exchanger, that would be difficult to pull off.
Okay, Dorothy. So a heat exchanger is one way to heat your wine. It's a pricey solution. It can be. Christian, is that what some people call hot pressing? Do you think? I've heard of this technique.
Essentially, yes. You know, that's similar. The whole thermovinification process to basically take the color and possibly the tannins out of the skins right away, and then just ferment the juice, like basically ferment a red juice, just like you would do it in Concord normally. You know, that can be done on the hybrid varieties as well if you're set up to do this instead of a must fermentation. Or you could do like they do in flash détente, do a vacuum expansion and heat up the must, cool it back down, and then do a fermentation after that. Again, a lot of the wines I would argue that we see on the market today, a lot of vinifera wines are done that way, but that's really more done to smoothen the tan so you can release those red wines earlier on, rather than the problem that we have where we have too few tannins.
We're starting to get a few flash détente systems here in the Midwest. I believe Lee Lutz out at Black Star Farms in northern Michigan has a system that he allows other winemakers to use.
And we were supposed to do a research project this year with the Institute about Flash Détente on Marquette versus Pinot Noir, but they had an issue with Lilut and they had an issue with the unit, so we couldn't do that project, but hopefully next year.
Mon Dieu.
Yeah.
There's a quick question here from Douglas Newser saying he missed the last part of the webinar due to a delivery. Will this be available on YouTube? Yes. All of these webinars that Ode and I have been doing for the last 2 years are available on a YouTube channel, and I believe those are that link is listed on the invitation flyer used when you registered for this event, or perhaps Ode, before the end of this, you could put that link up.
I did put the link in the chat box, but maybe you join us after I put the link. So I will just put it back.
Excellent. I'll say you're welcome to Jeffrey Stoger. He thanks us for all the info. Here's a question from Patrick Pirquet. Since bentonite treatments may remove desirable components from the wine, as well as the protein, would it make sense to add perhaps 50% of the recommended bentonite based on a heat test to partially heat stabilize the wine? If a winery is not shipping its wine via commercial carriers, perhaps this partial heat stabilization would be adequate. It's kind of a gray area.
So, yeah, I think if you stabilize the wine a little bit and you have experience with how fast that wine sells or how fast it is consumed, if you sell it out of your tasting room, there's no reason to stabilize it, for a trip to London or Shanghai. But what I would recommend against though is that you do. I know some winemakers say I always add half a pound just on my whites or something like that. Be rigid with your recipes or practices. Do a test, see what's there. Again, understand that what you see there with the heat test is basically all the unstable heat unstable protein. So A, there's other protein in the must, and B, bentonite takes more or less everything out, and the long-term unstable protein is really a small fraction. So the separation between proteins that are not stable in the long run because they're not very soluble in alcohol in a wine versus those that participate because the wine gets heated up. That's an important distinction, but basing it on the practices of how you sell your wine, how you distribute it, how fast your consumers are doing it, might in the end mean that you don't really have to use bentonite at all. I don't want you to test it out in a way that the people are going to return bottles to your tasting room. But it's at some point, you have to figure out how many people complain about tartrate crystals in the bottle, how many people complain about haziness in your bottles. Maybe you should go back from or stay away from clear bottles to start with. Go back to darker glass to hide some of those things. I understand it's a big risk because if you have something visibly unstable on a grocery store shelf, you might lose that shelf space and you're screwed. But again, if you sell stuff out of your tasting room mainly, and if somebody comes back, you can explain again what I said earlier, that that's actually a natural product. That's a sign of how authentic your wine actually is. That might completely satisfy the customer's concern. And since it's not not an actual tasteable defect, it's fine. I mean, you don't have a chunky protein in your glass, but taking it lightly on any fining, any stabilization, I think is not a bad idea at all.
Righty there. Dorothy O'Brien has a follow-up question. Well, she asks, what temperature, and is it the must? Dorothy, I don't know what you mean by is it the must. If you're talking about red
wine, yeah. So you would crush, you would crush and then heat treat the must. Again, those treatments are very quick. So let's say, I don't know, it's just pasteurizing milk. You run it through, but let's say that's 180 for 30 seconds. just to pick a number here. That's, of course, you can't do that by, you know, putting a turkey burner under your tank and heating it up, because you can't chill it back down so quickly. That's why you need a heat exchanger to pull this off. That again can be done for must if it's wide enough. I know the people on the coast in California do that with Chardonnay juice to get rid of botrytis. And the lacase that comes from botrytis infections. So it can be done on juice, but in this case, we're talking about must treatments, and that again requires a heat exchanger that lets you, you know, put the skins through, and it's cleanable, and that might again be tubes rather than different other exchange systems that might be usable for juice.
Right. So Dorothy, the point is that you, it's a longer time at a lower temperature or shorter time at a higher temperature, but you have to be able to raise up to that temperature for that specific time period and then chill the must right back down. So it's, I don't think you can make a heat exchanger in your garage, if that's what you're thinking. It's a bit more complex than that.
But if you have a colleague or somebody somewhere who can, you know, where you can test it out, or you can maybe send some of your must and try it out, then that might give you an idea if that's worth investing into. But sometimes you can also buy some used equipment. I know some of our wineries have some used heat exchangers from other applications, be that milk or be that something else. So it might take some tinkering with the equipment, but if it's useful. But again, that might be a good research project indeed for Ode here to make sure what the proper temperatures are, what the proper times are, to create kind of a setup that really works on a smaller scale.
All right, I have another question here from Bob Thaden, who's all the way out in Montana at Tongue River Winery, and Bob makes some wonderful wines. So he asks, what evidence is there for using saignée or bleeding to concentrate the skin and seed tannins in the remaining juice or must? He says he does this with Marquette. He creates a white Marquette or a rosé from the juice that he saignés off, and he gets a much richer, fuller-bodied Marquette.
Certainly saignée or any type of concentration process, if you do partial drying like a Pasito style, you take some of the water out, or some of the juice that doesn't contain any of the tannins, that certainly will increase both color and tannins. It's just again, you still might have a lot of those proteins in the remaining must as well, and again, it has to be seen how much how much of the tannins are those proteins taking out. The other aspect with saignée, of course, in general is yes, and you have to make the equivalent amount of, or the appropriate amount of rosé. And that in the past hasn't been a problem. You know, that's why saignée has become so popular over the last 20 years, because there was a demand for stronger red wines as well as a demand for rosés, and so that was a nice balance to accomplish both. So again, that depends on what sells and how you can do it. But that's certainly possible to use saignée. You have to be careful though. Again, if the fruit is underripe, you're also concentrating any underripe flavor. So that's why some of the délestage and some of the heating techniques that are promising to take some of the vegetal notes out during the heating process create a slightly different product. I personally don't like the heated taste of wines, but that's kind of an acquired taste and many people don't mind it. That's why a lot of those wines, those délestage wines, are so popular these days. There was a technique that was for many years ago and used for reds in Germany before global warming. They in their cool climate couldn't produce decent red wines, and since their main variety is Pinot Noir, heating the must was one of the main procedures. The more modern winemakers have gotten away from must heating again, but it was so widely used that the consumers assumed that that cooked note was part of red wine. People just accepted it because everybody did it. You know, that's you can, you know, do it that way too if everybody does it that way.
That's a very good point. We have an observation now from Patrick Pirquet. Sorry, Patrick, if I'm mispronouncing and it's Pirquet. Anyway, he says, just an observation, when he was working at OSU, which I assume is Ohio State University, or would that be Oregon? Doesn't matter. We did a number of experiments with hot pressing. He said he was impressed with the beautiful color and the quality of the wines. He suggests that this might be a process that should be tested more widely on more varieties. I can assure you that there are folks in academia that are pursuing those investigations. And he points out, of course, the critical variables are the temperature and the time. You know, we call it hot pressing, we call it heat exchanging. You could almost, it's like to pasteurization, where you raise temperature to a certain level for a certain time and then take it back down. Yeah, I'd like to look into that for Marquette, of course. But certainly all of these, whether they're the Minnesota grapes or French hybrids or whatever, it's a challenge, and we'd certainly like to get more news we could use and pass on to winemakers.
And hi Patrick, by the way, nice to see you on the webinar. Indeed, I think that's a perfect role that the university can play to figure out, you know, what are the best temperature time configurations that winemakers can use, or maybe even work on a system that doesn't require a delestage unit or require a fancy heat exchanger. Maybe there is a way to kind of heat the must with more conventional methods quickly to get rid of the protein, and then cool it back down. So maybe there's some device that we can come up with that would make it affordable for everybody to use it and reach that level of color extraction and tannin retention.
All right, thank you, Christian. Again, I'm going to look the Q&A. See this all in the chat, but nothing on the Q&A. Are there any further questions?
I'm sorry, I didn't figure out the way to share the sound. I can share the screen, but you won't be able to hear anything. So,
sorry, there are some questions in the Q&A though, Drew and Odd. I see there's a question from Seth about using it actually to stop the fermentation, taking away the
Funny enough, I can't see the Q&A all of a sudden.
The nitrogen or the amino acids. That's a little bit actually the way that Asti Spumante was first made before they took the yeast out and used DE and other filtration aids to take the yeast out. So when Asti Spumante was developed, that was the idea. There was that you would do multiple fermentations, and you basically take the yeast out, let it continue to ferment and grow again until all the nitrogen was gone. And that way the Italians were able to make wines with the residual sugar without sterile filtration, without any chemicals. So that idea to take all the nitrogen out to make a sweet wine, again, that requires some testing and practice. I'm not sure if that is possible. If you do that with bentonite, you're stripping everything else out. It's a little bit like using charcoal on a wine. You only end up with water and alcohol if you do that. But again, it might help to pull some nitrogen away. so that the wine can re-ferment. Maybe worth revisiting some of those kind of almost ancient techniques as well.
All right, and you're right, Christian, I do see the Q&A now. There's another question there from Florian Lederman up at Burr Vineyard in northern Minnesota. Does the temperature that the fermenting must reaches during primary fermentation have anything to do with later heat stability of the wine?
Well, I mean, think about it of making a poached egg. It takes relatively high temperature to denature protein and precipitate it. I don't think that's happening if you reach 90 degrees in your primary fermentation. But then again, some protein might fall out, and some of it might again be exactly that protein that might otherwise fall out if your wine comes close to 90 degrees when it is being shipped, or when it sits under some halogen light in your tasting room. So that might actually not be a bad thing. It's often difficult for us, particularly in the cooler climates, to reach the fermentation temperatures, particularly if you make it on a small scale. So getting a good fermentation going and reaching temperatures into the 90s, that would be a good argument that could actually contribute to heat stability of the wine eventually. If it helps with the tannin retention, I'm not so sure, because again, that fining might happen before you reach those temperatures.
All right. We have a comment here again from Bob Thaden in Montana, where he says, and Bob, I'd love to know who this is. A winemaker in Quebec is adding 5 to 10% Aronia wine to Marquette to increase the tannins. It's enough to add tannin, but not enough to significantly flavor the resulting Marquette wine. That's a creative solution. Of course, I know winemakers here in the Midwest that are adding, of course, tannic vinifera wine to their Marquette to get more tannin. But I'd never heard of Aronia. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, no, I think being creative in that way. I think the Burgundians, when they make their kir, named after the old mayor of Dijon, putting some blackcurrant juice into your white wine, gives you a nice tasty and slightly tannic aperitif as well. So I think there's no limit to what you can use, and if you grow something locally well that has tannins, why not try that out? I think that's to me, that's more authentic than adding some oak extract from some other place to it.
I know a winemaker here in Minnesota, the larger winery, and he does do quite a bit of vinifera from the West Coast, but he takes his later press fractions of his red vinifera. And again, as you press harder and harder, you get more tannins, and the pH starts to rise. Well, that works conveniently if he wants to add that to the Marquette, because the Marquette typically is of a lower pH and no tannin. So if you're going to somehow it starts to balance it out a little bit, adding this highly tannic, higher pH red vinifera press fraction to his Marquette.
Yeah, and again, going back to some of those old Italian techniques, the ripasso, using some of the dried grapes, and putting some of the kind of putting the pomace back into the next fermentation. I think there's a lot we can learn from those old practices to get our tannins levels up. So I think winemaking creativity is certainly solving a lot of those issues. So that's a great idea too.
I'd like to remind everybody that Marquette has only been released since 2006. None of us have ever tasted a Marquette made from 20-year-old vines, for example. So we're still very much in the infancy of working with some of these hybrids, some of these newer Minnesota hybrids. So we're all certainly asking good questions and coming up with some interesting ideas. Some of the research is being done as we speak. Ode and I just finished the last month doing an experiment on using whole cluster fermentation with Marquette, both to look at phenolics in general, not just tannins, but also color compounds, and to see to see if it helps what it does to the smell and flavor and taste of the wine. So certainly this work is being done, and as soon as that's ready, we're ready to get that information out, we'll be doing that.
Thank you very much for helping me.
Sure.
I'm so sad I couldn't follow up with everything, but so unfortunately we cannot have the recording of Dr. Nicolle, but I will make sure it's part of the recording available on YouTube. So please feel free to go back on YouTube and check for that presentation. If you have any further question about her presentation, send us an email or send her directly an email, and you would have those information. And hopefully we can talk about tannin a little bit more next month. Yeah.
There's a couple other comments here I'll read real quick, and then we can call it a webinar. Seth McFarland just wants to say thank you to our neighbors to the east for such a great webinar. You're welcome, Seth. Thanks again for that wonderful Nebraska hospitality I had there at Vinonord in 2016. Said they got their first 5 inches of snow yesterday in Lexington, Nebraska. And then Bob Thaden lists the winemakers, Sebastien Melieu, area and wine Gélinas. You can see it on the chat. In Quebec, I assume is the person adding Aronia berry to his Marquette. I would assume, I don't know about Canada, but in the US, if you were going to add a non-grape fruit to a wine, you'd have to get a formula. Wouldn't you think so, Christian?
That's right. You would have to make a formula wine. But then again, the TTB, are they really enforcing any of those rules ever? I'm not encouraging any illegal practices here, but a lot of the TTB rules are outdated and ridiculous. And I think the advantage of the American wine industry has always been that we have no regulation or little rules, and we're very free to blend and grow and do whatever we want in the winery. I think that should continue. I think that particularly if people have issues, if they have creative ideas to resolve that, and they create a tasty product, they shouldn't be limited in doing that or having to use a term like a formula wine that always feels like it's something strange and artificial. I think it's time to overcome that as well.
Yep. And there's one other, Patrick has one more comment. I think this is for you, Christian. It says Anna Catherine Mansfield, Dr. Anna Catherine Mansfield, has cautioned against adding commercial tannin products because often these products contain a lot of other stuff.
That's true. It has probably just 20-30% of real tannin.
And the rest is sawdust?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, we don't have any standards for what those products contain or what they're made from. They're allowed to be used. On the other hand, I also want to avoid that we're always beating down on the suppliers. I think a lot of people in the supply industry are very creative, and they're creating really great products for the winemakers. They're catering to their needs, and I would like to acknowledge that as well. There's a lot of really good stuff out there, but again, sometimes it would be helpful to truly understand what you're doing to your wine, and sometimes that's hard. The same is true. I always argue with the yeast nutrients. Often it's very unclear what they do, if they do anything. But it's a little bit like multivitamins. You feel good about taking them. If they do anything, is a whole nother story.
Yeah, that's true.
Agreed with both of you. I'll just remind everybody that on the chat, Ode has put the address, the link for your feedback about the webinar today.
Mm-hmm. And I did put the link for the recordings. I don't know when that would be ready, the recording of today, but wait for that. Stay tuned for that.
we're begging you participants to take 2 or 3 minutes to give us your feedback. We don't know what you like or what you don't like, or what more information or what future webinars you would like for Ode and I to cooperate on, if any. So if it's very useful to us and our employers for you to respond, if you can, to that survey. Other than that, I'll go back to the Q&A just one more time.
Bob has a new comment.
Oh, Bob.
Bob's comment that we've only had market to play with for about 10 years is right on target compared to 2,000 years with vinifera. I think we've got great possibilities yet to discover. Good presentation. That's totally true, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. And Bob, I still plan to come out and see you someday when I get the chance. Bob Thaden is a gentleman, winemaker, as I say, way out in the wilds of southeastern Montana. He has made some of the best Marquettes I've ever tasted. He actually won a Jefferson Cup 2 years ago for his, I think it was his 2017 Marquette. So keep up the good work, Bob. And I think about you all the time. We're at 4:26 p.m.
Yeah, I think we're all good. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you very much, Christian, for being with us too, for this
My
great
pleasure.
presentation.
Thank you very much for having us. I'll be back in 2,000 years, and then we'll talk about Marquette again.
Good.
Take care.
Oh, and
Thank you.
Of course, I don't want to spoil anybody's party or say something I can't really back up, but we here at the University of Minnesota are we hear all of this stuff. We take it all very seriously, and we are working very, very hard every year to get some more great hybrid grapes bred that can address these issues. Of course, we're very interested in getting another red grape. I made probably about 55 batches of reds for the very first time, from the very first crop from some new crosses. So we are pursuing this, and but I remind you all, it still takes a minimum of 15 years from the initial cross hybridization to when we're ready to release it to the public. So it's a long, slow gain. And we can't help it. The first test that the grapes have to pass is they've got to be able to survive these Minnesota winters. And we all appreciate that it's an awful lot to ask a grape to be so cold hardy, to offer some disease resistance so we can lower our spray inputs, to have good growth habits, and then and taste good and smell good, and then to behave well in the winery. I do keep notes about red wines that are easy to work with, that press easily, or other ones that are very slimy or snotty or have other issues. So it's a long, long road. And every grape that we get is one out of 15 or 20,000 attempts. So we appreciate your patience. We're working on it.
Good. Thank you so much. And so sorry for not being able to share that presentation from Dr. Nicolle, but stay tuned and go on YouTube to get that presentation. Thanks again, and feel free to reach out to us. And see you next month.
See you all next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.